There are secrets buried beneath the red soil of forgotten kingdoms, mysteries whispered through the wind that moves across the forests of Africa and the deserts of the East. The story of humanity is not a straight line, but a circle, one that always returns to its beginning. And if you listen closely, if you dig beneath the noise of colonized narratives and historical erasures, you begin to hear the echoes of three mighty peoples whose stories have been intertwined since the dawn of time: the Igbo of the Niger, the Amhara of the Ethiopian highland, and the ancient Hebrews of the desert sands. This is not merely a tale of race or religion, it is the revelation of a shared identity, a hidden brotherhood that connects the heartbeats of three civilizations separated by geography, but united by blood, wisdom, and purpose. The Igbo, proud and resilient, are not merely a people of trade and innovation, they are carriers of an ancient code, a covenant written not on paper, but in their consciousness. Their reverence for truth, justice, and community is older than the modern world can imagine. Before the Western world defined civilization, the Igbo had already built a system governed by equality and balance, no kings ruling over slaves, but elders guiding the free. Their villages were living temples, every square inch resonating with spiritual science. They believed in Chi, the divine spark within every human being, a belief that mirrors the ancient Hebrew idea that man was made in the image of a creator. And across the Horn of Africa, in the highlands of Ethiopia, the Amhara people preserved the rhythm of that same ancient spirit, carrying with them the echoes of Hebrew chants, the symbols of the lost ark and the light of the ancient covenant. For centuries, historians have looked at Africa as a land of darkness. But what if the darkness they saw was only the blinding brilliance of light misunderstood? The Amhara kings of Ethiopia claim descent from Solomon, but the connection runs deeper than legend. Their language, Amharic, dances with Semitic tones similar to Hebrew, their scriptures guarded in Ge'ez scrolls that predate many European records. They kept a fire burning through centuries of invasion, drought, and exile, a fire that refused to be extinguished because it was not just national pride, it was ancestral memory. Their kings were not merely rulers, they were custodians of time, guardians of a forgotten bond that linked the mountains of Ethiopia to the forests of the Niger and the deserts of Judah. When you study the customs of the Igbo, the parallels are undeniable. Circumcision on the 8th day, the observance of sacred market days, dietary purity, and names that invoke divine presence, all echo the traditions of ancient Israel. Even the Igbo greeting, Chukwu Gozi Gi, may God bless you, rings with the same vibration as ancient Hebrew blessing. But these are not coincidences. These are fingerprints left behind by migrations long before colonial maps existed, by travelers who carried not swords or ships, but symbols, stories, and truth. Somewhere between the Nile and the Niger, the bloodlines crossed and the memories merged. The Amhara, too, holds ceremonies that mirror the old Hebrew rites, processions of the Ark, fasting rituals, and chants that echo the psalm. Ethiopia was one of the few nations never colonized because it held within it something the world could not easily conquer: spiritual authority older than empire. It was not just faith, it was ancestral science. It was the understanding that humanity's first covenant began in Africa. Long before the pyramids or scrolls, there were oral laws carved into the hearts of men who knew that the Creator's voice could be heard in thunder, rain, and the quiet breath of a newborn child. The Hebrew scriptures speak of a people scattered to the ends of the earth, a tribe that would lose its language, its name, and its place, but not its essence. When you listen to the songs of the Igbo and Amhara, when you trace the rituals and the proverbs, you find the same essence vibrating there, the same ancient light surviving under different names. Colonization tried to erase that, labeling Africans as primitive, their traditions as superstition. But history is beginning to awaken, and the stones are beginning to speak again. Every drumbeat, every masquerade, every sacred story retold in an Igbo courtyard or an Ethiopian monastery is another fragment of that ancient brotherhood calling us to remember who we are. This is why so many scholars are puzzled by the uncanny resemblance between Hebrew and African cosmologies, the belief in divine order, the emphasis on family and inheritance, the moral codes that predate religion itself. The Igbo saying on Yikwe, Chia Akwe, when a man says yes, his spirit agrees, is not just philosophy, it is the same principle of faith that built the Hebrew nation. The Amhara concept of Tuahedo, oneness with the divine, reflects that same understanding of unity between man and creator. Across millennia, across deserts and oceans, these beliefs endured because they were not imported from the outside, they were born from within Africa herself. When the slave ships came, they did not just take bodies, they took libraries of wisdom hidden in human form. The scattered descendants of the Igbo, the Amhara, and the Hebrews became the living vessels of that brotherhood, carrying fragments of that truth into the Americas, the Caribbean, and beyond. And now, in this age of rediscovery, the spirit of awakening is rising. The younger generation of Africans and descendants of the Diaspora are beginning to question, to dig, to connect the dots their ancestors whispered through symbols and songs. The truth can no longer be silenced by the textbooks of those who wrote history to serve empire. The connection between the Igbo, Amhara, and Hebrew is not about claiming superiority. It is about reclaiming identity. It is about remembering that civilization did not begin with the West. It began with a people who understood cosmic order, harmony with nature, and the sacredness of life. The pyramids, the scripts, the prophecies, the music, all of it is evidence that Africa was the first laboratory of divine consciousness. When the Igbo built communities based on truth and equality, when the Amhara protected their sacred scrolls through centuries of war, when the Hebrews carried the covenant through exile, they were each keeping alive one flame of the same eternal fire. Today the world trembles not because of wars or politics, but because truth is rising. The descendants of that hidden brotherhood are awakening to their connection, realizing that their ancestors were not divided by race or religion, but united by destiny. The Igbo proverb says, "Anama ki nwa ka kia kia," I protect a child until his God protects him. That protection has always been divine memory guiding humanity through its darkest hours. The Amhara say, Ende birhan ikore lewut, like light, truth cannot be buried. And the Hebrews say, or Yashar el Israel, light shines upon Israel. These are not separate phrases, they are three languages speaking the same truth, that light is our inheritance. When we begin to see that unity, something inside us shifts. We stop seeing Africa as divided tribes and start seeing her as a constellation of stars forming one galaxy of power. The Igbo with their intellectual courage, the Amhara with their spiritual resilience, and the Hebrews with their covenantal strength, all represent dimensions of the same human soul striving to reconnect to its source. Every migration, every exile, every song of sorrow and freedom is another verse in the same poem. And now that poem is being sung again by a new generation who refuse to be defined by colonial narratives. The time has come to tell our story not as victims of history, but as its authors. The time has come to raise the banner of unity, not in politics or religion, but in truth. The Igbo must look eastward and recognize their reflection in the Amhara. The Amhara must look westward and see the same divine pulse in the Igbo. And the Hebrew descendants across the world must look southward and realize that Africa was never lost. It was only hidden beneath centuries of lies, waiting for those with eyes to see and hearts to believe in the ancestral code of unity. The Hidden Brotherhood is not a conspiracy, it is a calling. It is the reminder that our blood remembers what the world has forgotten. It is the whisper that tells us that humanity's redemption lies not in division but in remembrance. When we remember, we restore. When we restore, we rise. The Igbo, the Amhara, and the Hebrews are not three stories, they are one story told in three dialects of light. And when that light merges again, the world will remember what civilization truly means. For the truth cannot die, it can be buried, rewritten, and denied, but it will always rise. The red soil of the Niger, the golden dust of Ethiopia, and the desert sands of ancient Judea all carry the same message in silence. We are one people born of the same divine mind, scattered by time but destined to reunite. The brotherhood is not lost, it is awakening. The chains of forgetfulness are breaking, and the rhythm of the drums, the chants of the monks, and the words of the prophets are once again in harmony. Africa is remembering herself, and when she does, the world will be reborn through. When blood remembers, history trembles, The heartbeat of forgotten nations begins to rise from the dust, and the voices of those who were silenced begin to speak again through the wind. Across the Niger Delta, the Ethiopian highlands, and the sands once walked by the ancient Hebrews, there runs a single current of memory, an ancestral code older than any scripture, deeper than any empire, stronger than any chain. It is the memory of identity, the remembrance of who we were before the world told us what to become. It is not a religion, not a myth, but a spiritual awakening, an echo of truth that cannot die, only sleep until the right generation stirs it awake. The blood of the Igbo remembers. It remembers a time when man and the divine were not separate, when community was sacred, and when truth was not taught but lived. It remembers the rhythm of the earth before the strangers came with their maps and tongues, calling civilization what they could not understand. The Igbo blood remembers freedom as a natural law, not as something granted by rulers or documents. Before slavery, before colonization, before borders, there was a system built on balance, where elders governed not through tyranny but through wisdom, and every man was equal beneath the eye of Chi, the divine spark within him. This philosophy, buried beneath centuries of invasion and foreign doctrine, mirrors the same covenant the Hebrews carried through their deserts, that man's spirit is his temple, and his life a testimony to the divine. The blood of the Amhara remembers too. High in the misty hills of Ethiopia, that blood has preserved stories the world thought forgotten. It remembers Solomon's line and the Queen of Sheba's journey, the sacred scrolls written in gaze and the songs that predate Western timekeeping. It remembers battles fought not for land or gold, but for the soul of a people determined never to be colonized. It remembers fasting rituals, the sound of ancient horns during processions, and the hidden chambers where sacred texts were guarded through centuries of foreign eyes. The Amhara were not merely kings and warriors, they were librarians of eternity, keeping safe the manuscripts of Africa's divine covenant. Their language, their chants, their architecture all carry symbols of Hebrew resonance, because they too are children of the same ancestral flame. And what of the Hebrews themselves? Their blood remembers exile, migration, and promise. It remembers the covenant of Abraham, the wisdom of Moses, the songs of David, and the exile of Babylon. But what if part of that exile did not go north or west, but south into Africa's beating heart? What if some of those tribes who vanished into the deserts did not disappear but transformed, adopting new languages, new names, but keeping the same spirit? When you look into the eyes of the Igbo or the Amhara, when you study their laws of purity, their family structures, their devotion to truth and order, it becomes clear they carry the same flame that once lit the deserts of Sinai. This is not about imitation, it is about inheritance. The world divided these people into tribes and religions, but blood has no borders. The Igbo, Amhara, and Hebrew are like three rivers flowing from the same mountain, each carving its own path, yet all leading back to the same source. When blood remembers, it begins to vibrate with the frequency of origin. It refuses to be silenced by colonial education or rewritten history. It calls from within, whispering through dreams, through music, through intuition. It says, "You were never lost, you were never broke, you were only hidden until your appointed time." Today, that time is arriving. Across continents, descendants of this brotherhood are awakening. Scholars are uncovering linguistic patterns that link the Igbo tongue to ancient Hebrew phonetics. Archaeologists are finding similarities between Ethiopian relics and Judaic artifacts. And beyond evidence, there is something deeper, something spiritual. It is the sense that all three peoples were designed to preserve a certain light through the ages, to carry moral and cosmic truths through the storms of history. That light was nearly extinguished by slavery, by colonization, by assimilation, but it survived in song and proverb and silence. The Igbo man carrying his name with pride, the Amhara woman singing an ancient hymn in gaze, the Hebrew child studying the Torah, they are all part of the same remembrance. Their lives are threads in one divine fabric. The colonizers could divide lands, rename kingdoms, burn libraries, and rewrite maps, but they could not destroy memory. Memory is not kept in books. It is kept in the blood. It travels through DNA, through instinct, through the unexplainable connection one feels to certain words, sounds, and rhythms. When an Igbo man hears the shofar of Israel or the drumbeat of Gondar, something inside him stirs, though he may not understand why. It is blood speaking to blood. We live in an age of awakening, When truth travels faster than suppression, the younger generation is beginning to ask, who were we before slavery? What kingdoms did we build before empire came? Why do our customs mirror those of ancient people halfway across the world? These questions are not accidents. They are signals. The ancestors are calling through the DNA of the living. The awakening is not political, it is spiritual and historic. It is the reuniting of the scattered bones of truth, rising again to form the body of knowledge long buried under colonial dust. When blood remembers, it does not seek revenge. It seeks restoration. It seeks to heal the fractures between tribes, between nations, between time itself. It reminds us that Africa was never the dark continent. It was the hidden continent, the sacred archive of human memory. The Igbo were the philosophers of equality, the Amhara the guardians of spiritual order, and the Hebrews the bearers of the covenant. Together they represent the three pillars of civilization: knowledge, faith, and endurance. This is why the awakening of this brotherhood matters. It is not just for Africans or Jews or historians, it is for humanity. Because when we trace the true origin of civilization, we find that light has always risen from the same place, the cradle of Africa, the same place where man first breathed, first dreamed, first sang to the heaven. When the Igbo reclaim their identity, when the Amhara rise in remembrance, when the Hebrews look south and see their reflection, the world begins to heal from centuries of separation. The blood remembers because it must. It remembers not just names and places, but values, harmony, truth. It remembers that humanity was once a single family before greed divided it. It remembers that power was once measured not by conquest, but by wisdom. And now that remembrance is returning not as nostalgia, but as prophecy. For the winds that move through the forests of Nigeria, the mountains of Ethiopia, and the deserts of Israel all carry the same vibration. Awaken, the return of Africa's forgotten lineage is not a myth, it is an unfolding. It is happening through the minds and hearts of those who dare to remember. The story is being written again, not in ink, but in the actions of a generation determined to uncover the truth. When blood remembers, identity is reborn, history is rewritten, and destiny is restored. The world may have forgotten who Africa truly is, but Africa has never forgotten herself. And now, as her children awaken from every corner of the earth, the ancient covenant of unity rises once more. For when blood remembers, nothing can stop its return. There is a sound that echoes through time, a vibration older than language, older than kingdoms, older even than the first fire. It is the echo of Eden, the whisper of humanity's first covenant. And though the world has forgotten where that sound began, Africa remembers. Beneath her rivers, in her mountains, in her songs and symbols lies the original pulse of creation. It was in Africa that humanity first looked to the sky and understood that life was more than survival, that it was sacred law, balance, and purpose. Long before parchment, before temples and written scripture, Africa spoke directly with the language of the universe. Her people understood that order was not forced by rulers or armies, but written into the very rhythm of existence. The soil of Africa cradled the first minds to wonder, to dream, to seek meaning beyond the horizon. The echo of Eden still lingers there, waiting to be remembered. The Nile was not only a river, it was a vein of knowledge flowing through time. From its waters rose civilizations that mapped the stars, measured time, and understood the harmony between man and cosmos. Ethiopia, that ancient highland, was not a footnote of history, but the spine of humanity's spiritual awakening. In the sacred city of Axum, stones were carved not merely for beauty, but as codes of cosmic order. The Amhara, inheritors of this ancient legacy, preserved the sacred tongue of Ge'ez and the oldest continuous traditions of human covenant. Their rituals of light, their chants at dawn, and their reverence for the Ark are not religious imitation. They are ancestral continuity. They embody the first law humanity ever knew, that creation and creator are not separate, that all existence is bound by balance. The Amhara did not simply worship, they remembered. The Igbo, far to the west, carried that same rhythm of truth in their blood. They did not build temples of stone, but living temples of consciousness. They called it Chi, the divine spark in every soul, the portion of the Creator that resides within man. This belief was not taught by prophets or missionaries. It was born in them, older than any written word. They believed that to know oneself was to know the universe, that every human carried a fragment of divine order. Their laws were built on equity, their justice on harmony, their community on truth. And when you listen closely to their proverbs, you hear the same wisdom that once flowed through Eden itself. The idea that heaven and earth are not distant realms but reflections of each other. To the Igbo, morality was not a system of punishment, it was alignment with nature's rhythm. They lived as if the Creator watched not from above but from within. This is the same understanding that formed the heart of the Hebrew covenant. The Hebrews did not invent divine law, they remembered their commandments, their rituals, their language. All of it carried the same pulse that once moved through the sacred mountains of Africa. The earliest Hebrew stories speak of a garden in the east, of a covenant made not with one people but with all humanity. That garden was not a mythic paradise hidden in the clouds. It was a real land, a sacred memory of Africa's womb, the cradle of moral consciousness. When the Hebrews spoke of Eden, they were remembering a time when man and earth walked in agreement, when the laws of heaven were written not in scrolls but in stars, in rivers, in the breath of wind. When you place the Igbo beside the Amhara and the Hebrews, you begin to see that they are reflections of one truth seen through different mirrors. The Amhara preserved the language of the covenant, the Igbo preserved its philosophy, and the Hebrews carried its story into exile and back again. Each guarded a piece of the same flame, the sacred science of balance. They each understood that man was not meant to dominate creation, but to harmonize with it. This was humanity's first covenant, the agreement between consciousness and cosmos, between life and its source. And Africa, as the mother of all nations, was its first witness. It was Africa that measured the cycles of the moon before calendars were born, that named the stars long before telescopes, that built cities aligned with celestial order. Her people understood mathematics not as numbers but as the poetry of the universe. The Ethiopians calculated the calendar of the sun, the Egyptians charted the path of Orion, the Igbo marked their sacred days with the rhythm of cosmic time. They were not guessing, they were remembering the language of creation. That is why the echo of Eden still lives in Africa, because Africa never stopped listening. While empires rose and fell, while colonizers rewrote maps and gods, Africa kept the rhythm beneath the soil. The tragedy is not that the world forgot Africa's role, it is that Africa was silenced. Colonization did not merely steal land, it stole memory. It taught generations to see their ancestors as primitive and their wisdom as myth. But truth cannot be destroyed, it can only be buried. And now in this age of awakening, that truth is breaking through the surface again. The younger generation is beginning to rediscover the symbols, the proverbs, the sciences that reveal Africa's sacred place in humanity's story. The echo of Eden is growing louder, calling her children home to remembrance. It is not a religious awakening, it is a return to truth. Africa's covenant was not with one tribe or one name, it was with all life. The Amhara sang it in their hymns, the Igbo spoke it in their markets, and the Hebrews wrote it into scrolls. The covenant said, live in balance, honor creation, seek truth, remember who you are. When humanity forgot this, wars began, greed multiplied, and the earth began to ache. But the covenant was never lost. It was only hidden beneath centuries of conquest and confusion. To find it again, we must listen to Africa, not as the world taught us to see her, but as she truly is, the first temple of creation, the living memory of the divine order that once guided mankind. The echo of Eden is the sound of awakening, the vibration of truth returning to its source. It reminds us that humanity's first wisdom was African, that the laws of morality, rhythm, and harmony were first written on the soil of the motherland. It tells us that our ancestors were not pagans but philosophers, not idolaters but astronomers of spirit. The covenant of old was not about religion, it was about relationship between man and earth, man and spirit, man and truth. When we restore that understanding, humanity can heal. The Igbo, the Amhara, and the Hebrew are not separate stories. They are chapters of the same ancient memory. Each holds a key to understanding the sacred science of balance that humanity lost when it turned away from its origin. When these fragments reunite, when Africa remembers that she was Eden's guardian, the world will remember what it means to live in covenant once more. The echo of Eden is not fading, it is rising again, calling every heart that still listens to the rhythm of truth. And as that echo grows louder, the world will see that the beginning was never lost. It has always been beating beneath the soil of Africa, waiting for her children to return and carry the flame of balance into the future once more. There are codes written in our blood, patterns older than civilization, stories woven into the very rhythm of our hearts. These are not legends or symbols, they are living memories that have survived centuries of silence. When you study the Igbo of the Niger and the Amhara of the Ethiopian highlands, and when you compare their ancient customs to those of the early Hebrews, something extraordinary begins to emerge. You see that beneath their differences lies an invisible thread, a shared vibration, an ancestral code that connects them across time and geography. It is a code that speaks of divine order, human dignity, and cosmic unity, a knowledge not given by invaders or prophets, but born from the consciousness of the first people to walk this earth. That code still lives, waiting for a generation bold enough to read it again. The Igbo carry this code in their way of life, in the structure of their society, in the sacred wisdom of their elders. Long before modern governments or constitutions, the Igbo practiced a system of governance built on equality, balance, and truth. Every man and woman held within them a spark of chi, the divine essence that made them creators of their own destiny. Their justice system was based not on fear, but on restoration. Their laws guided by natural order rather than coercion. They believed that truth was a living being, that to live dishonestly was to violate the harmony of the universe. Their proverbs, filled with layered meaning, were not just words of wisdom but fragments of an ancient philosophy that once bound humanity together. In the Igbo worldview, there was no need for a single monarch or ruler, for the divine lived within each person, guiding them through conscience and balance. Across the Horn of Africa, the Amhara preserved this same understanding in different forms. Their rituals, language, and spiritual traditions reflect an inheritance that predates even the written word. The Amhara's reverence for the Ark, their chants in the ancient Gaze tongue, and their practice of purification before sacred gatherings mirror the ancient Hebrew rites of old. The Amhara kingdom was built not merely on power but on spiritual law, the idea that the king ruled only through divine justice and moral clarity. Their sense of community, humility, and ancestral memory is a reflection of an older code, one that saw the Creator not as a distant ruler but as a presence woven through every element of creation. The Hebrews, whose covenant has influenced much of the world's moral consciousness, also carried that same ancestral memory. They were told they were chosen not to rule but to preserve a law that transcended kingdoms, a law of truth, purity, and balance. When one studies the moral codes of the Hebrews and the Igbo, or the sacred rituals of the Amhara, one begins to see a pattern that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Circumcision on the 8th day, sacred days of rest, dietary laws, and purification rituals all mirror one another. Even the languages bear traces of shared roots. Words for spirit, light, and divinity resonate with familiar tones. It is as if the same flame was lit in different places to ensure that no darkness could extinguish it completely. This ancestral code is not written on stone or parchment. It is carried in the blood, passed through memory, intuition, and dream. When the Igbo gather in their markets, following the ancient 4-day cycle, they are unknowingly practicing the rhythm of time found in early Hebrew calendar. When the Amhara sing their morning hymns invoking the presence of light over darkness, they are echoing the same ancient call that once rose from the deserts of Sinai. Both peoples, though separated by land and history, have preserved fragments of the same divine blueprint. The code that binds them is not religious dogma, it is ancestral science. The understanding that man and the universe move in harmony, that truth must guide order, and that every soul carries within it a reflection of the eternal. Over the centuries, invaders tried to erase this connection. Empires rewrote maps, missionaries replaced ancestral names with foreign ones, and historians silenced voices that spoke of unity between Africa and the East. But truth cannot be buried forever. The code is awakening again in our generation, in the scholars who compare languages, in the youth rediscovering their roots, in the consciousness of a people reclaiming their stolen identity. It is in the way the diaspora seeks to reconnect, the way Africans are beginning to understand that their greatness did not begin with colonization, it began with creation itself. When one observes the moral structure of Igbo society, its emphasis on family, justice, and truth, and compares it to the laws that guided the Hebrews, it becomes clear that both share a moral DNA shaped by divine intelligence. The same is seen in the Amhara's deep reverence for order and light. These values were not imposed from outside but emerged from within, because the code was already written in the soul of humanity long before organized religion divided it. The Igbo's belief in Chi, the Amhara's understanding of Tawahido, oneness with the divine, and the Hebrews' commitment to covenant all speak of one truth, that divinity is not outside us, it is within us. The ancestral code is more than history, it is destiny. It reminds us that humanity's first civilizations were not founded on greed or conquest, but on balance. Africa was the cradle not only of human life but of spiritual order, scientific understanding, and moral consciousness. The Igbo carried the knowledge of community harmony, the Amhara preserved sacred tradition, and the Hebrews maintained the covenant of moral law. Together they represent the three pillars of civilization: mind, spirit, and law. Each culture has kept one part of the code alive, and when they unite again in understanding, humanity will remember the full pattern. Modern science now confirms what the ancients already knew, that memory can be carried in the body, that knowledge is inherited through generations. So when a child from Igbo ancestry feels drawn to the ancient symbols of Israel, or when an Amhara scholar finds resonance in the proverbs of the Niger Delta, it is not coincidence, it is remembrance. The blood is speaking, awakening the dormant wisdom that was never lost, only sleep. This is the call of the ancestral code. It whispers through dreams, through intuition, through the quiet pull toward ancient truth. It calls us back to unity, to the understanding that we were never many tribes, but one family scattered by time. The rediscovery of this code is not about rewriting history for pride's sake, it is about healing the fractures that have divided humanity. The colonial world taught Africa to forget, but memory is rising again, unstoppable and radiant. The Igbo and the Amhara are not just African peoples, they are living archives of a sacred law. Their customs, their languages, their sense of divine balance are keys to restoring a consciousness that the world desperately needs today. In their union lies the secret of peace, because their code teaches that no man is above another, that life itself is sacred, that harmony is the true mark of civilization. If we are to rise again as a global family, we must listen to this code. We must study it not as myth but as science, not as superstition but as the mathematics of the spirit. The Igbo and Amhara mirror the lost tribes not because they imitate them, but because they are them, the living descendants of an ancient truth that the world has forgotten. The time has come to remember, to lift the veil that colonial history placed over the face of Africa. The time has come for Africa's children, wherever they are, to awaken to the knowledge that they are not the forgotten, but the foundation. The code lives within them, and when they rise to read it once more, the world will remember what it truly means to be human, balanced, wise, and divine in spirit. The ancestral code is awakening, and through it the scattered tribes of earth shall know again that they were never lost, only waiting for the moment when memory would lead them home.